He brought his pregnant mistress to her father's funeral. He held the woman's hand as they walked past the casket. He smiled at the mourners as though he were arriving at a cocktail party, rather than standing 6 feet from the body of the man whose daughter he had spent 7 years deceiving. What he did not know, what nobody in that room knew except the dead man's attorney and the dead man's daughter, was that the will had already been executed. The trust had already been activated. The trap had already closed. Dominic Hale believed he was watching his wife's lowest moment. He believed the funeral was the beginning of her collapse. He believed that within 6 months, he would own everything the old man had left behind, and the quiet woman in black standing beside the casket would sign whatever he put in front of her, because she had always signed whatever he put in front of her. He was wrong about all of it. This was not the beginning of her fall. This was the final page of his story. He simply had not. Her name was Vivian Ashford. To her husband, to his colleagues, to the social circle they moved through in Boston, she was simply Viv, the reserved one, the woman who sat at the end of the table at dinner parties and listened more than she spoke, the wife who dressed well, but not extravagantly, who drove a sensible car, who worked 3 days a week at a nonprofit literacy foundation and spent the other 2 volunteering at a children's hospital. The woman who never raised her voice, never made demands, never drew attention to herself in any room she entered. What none of them understood, what Dominic had never once suspected in 7 years of marriage, was that Vivian Ashford was the sole heir to a fortune that exceeded $300 million. Her father, William Ashford, had built that fortune over 40 years in private equity and commercial real estate. He operated through a network of holding companies and family trusts so layered that his name appeared on no public list, no magazine cover, no charity gala program. William Ashford believed that wealth was a tool, not a performance. He believed that the moment you announced your money, you lost control of how people responded to you. He had taught his daughter this principle before she was old enough to understand it. And by the time she was old enough, she had already seen enough evidence to know he was right. Vivian's mother died when she was 9. Leukemia. Vivian sat beside the hospital bed for the final week and watched the monitors and held her mother's hand and absorbed, at an age when most children are learning multiplication tables, the understanding that life was fragile and that the people who survived it were the ones who paid attention. She paid attention to everything after that. She watched how her father's business partners behaved when they thought no one was observing. She watched how employees changed their posture when William entered a room. She watched how women at school treated her differently after a classmate's parent mentioned the Ashford name at a fundraiser. She developed, by 16, an almost clinical ability to detect the difference between genuine human connection and the performance of connection motivated by proximity to money. By 20, she was exhausted by the performance. By 22, she told her father she wanted to live without the name, not permanently, but long enough to find out whether anyone could see her clearly without the light of wealth illuminating her from behind. William understood. He had wanted the same thing once. He helped her build the architecture. She kept the surname Ashford because it was common enough to avoid suspicion. But she moved to a different city, took a modest apartment, and began working at the Literacy Foundation for a salary that covered her rent and her groceries and nothing else. She drove a Honda. She wore clothes from mid-range stores. She carried no credit cards connected to the trust. The only visible trace of her real life was a platinum bracelet she wore on her left wrist, thin and unadorned, engraved on the inside with her mother's initials. It was worth, materially, about $6,000. Its actual value was beyond calculation. William maintained a single instruction throughout the experiment. You will know the right person because they will never make you feel like you owe them an explanation for being quiet. The wrong person will always need you to be louder than you are. Vivian carried that instruction into every interaction for the next 3 years. She carried it into the bar where she met Dominic Hale on a Friday evening after a long week at the foundation. She carried it into the 7 years that followed. And she husband. Dominic Hale was a vice president at a mid-sized investment advisory firm. He was the kind of handsome that required maintenance, gym sessions and tailored suits, and a skincare routine he would never admit to. He spoke with authority about markets he understood only superficially. He name-dropped clients at dinner parties. He believed that success was a matter of presentation, that if you looked successful and sounded successful, the substance would eventually follow. He met Vivian and performed the assessment that all men like Dominic perform. She was attractive. She was quiet. She was agreeable. She did not challenge him or compete with him or demand the center of any room. She was, in his calculation, the perfect complement to the image he was constructing. A wife who would enhance without overshadowing. A partner who would manage without complaining. A woman who would make his life run smoothly while he took credit for the smoothness. They dated for a year. Vivian watched him the way she watched everyone. She tracked his behavior across contexts. How he spoke to waiters. How he handled a delayed flight. How he talked about women who were not present. The results were mixed, but not disqualifying. He was not cruel. He was not dishonest. Not yet. He was simply shallow in a way that Vivian, exhausted from years of detecting deeper deceptions, mistook for transparency. They married in year 2. Small ceremony. Vivian planned everything. Dominic contributed enthusiasm and a guest list composed entirely of professional contacts he wanted to impress. The marriage settled into its architecture within 18 months. Vivian managed the household. All of it. The mortgage, paid from her foundation salary, and a small personal account connected to a minor investment portfolio that was itself a fraction of her actual holdings. The bills, the insurance, the maintenance, the social calendar, the meal planning, the cleaning service coordination, the holiday card signed with both names, the birthday gifts for his mother, selected and wrapped by Vivian, credited to both of them. Dominic managed nothing. He came home to a clean house and a prepared dinner and fresh sheets, and a wife who asked about his day and listened to the answer and never once asked him to reciprocate the question. He existed inside the result of her labor the way a guest exists inside a hotel, enjoying the service without considering the staff. Within 3 years, the pattern had calcified. Vivian was the infrastructure. Dominic was the occupant. And the distance between what she contributed and what he acknowledged had become so vast that it was no longer a gap. William Ashford visited his daughter every 6 weeks. He drove himself. He wore no watch that cost more than $200. He sat in Vivian's modest kitchen and drank coffee from a chipped mug and asked her questions about her work and her marriage with the careful, non-directive precision of a man who had spent 40 years reading people across negotiating tables. He did not like Dominic. He had never said so directly, but Vivian knew her father's silences the way a sailor knows weather patterns, by what they contained rather than what they expressed. On one visit, 3 years into the marriage, William sat at the kitchen table while Dominic was at work and said something that Vivian would remember with perfect clarity for the rest of her life. A man who never asks where the money goes is either very trusting or very certain he will always have access to it. The first is rare. The second is dangerous. Vivian looked at her father. He was stirring his coffee. He did not look up. Dominic has never asked you a single question about how this household runs. That means he believes it will always run for him. When a man believes that, he stops seeing the person running it. And when he stops seeing her, he starts looking elsewhere. Vivian did not respond. She filed the observation. She continued managing. She continued watching. 18 months later, her father's Vivian found the first evidence on a Monday morning. She was not looking. She was paying the credit card bill, a task she performed monthly with the same methodical attention she applied to everything. A charge appeared that she did not recognize. A restaurant in the financial district. Dinner for two. $340. Dated on a Thursday, when Dominic had told her he was at a client event. She held the statement for 10 seconds. She set it down. She paid the bill. She made breakfast. She went to work. She did not confront Dominic. She began to document. Over the following 6 weeks, she assembled a file with the discipline of a woman whose father had built an empire on due diligence. Credit card charges at restaurants and hotels Dominic had never mentioned. Calendar discrepancies. A phone left charging on a nightstand that contained, when she checked it once while he showered, a thread of messages with a contact saved as a Meridian project that had nothing to do with any project. The woman was Serena Cross, a junior associate at a competing firm, 29, blonde, confident in the way of someone who had learned early that beauty was leverage and applied it without hesitation. The affair had been running for approximately 4 months when Vivian discovered it. By the time she finished documenting, it was 6 months old, and Serena was pregnant. Vivian learned about the pregnancy from a receipt. A boutique on Newberry Street. Baby clothes. purchased on Dominic's card. The receipt was dated 3 days before their wedding anniversary, which Dominic had forgotten. She sat in her car in the parking lot of the Literacy Foundation and held the receipt and felt something shift inside her. Not heartbreak, something more structural. The sound of a load-bearing wall being removed from a building that had been standing on it for 7 years. The building did not collapse immediately. It simply began to lean, imperceptibly, toward the ground. She called her father that evening. "I know," William said, before she finished the first sentence. "How long have you known?" 6 weeks. My security team flagged it during a routine review of the household accounts. Vivian closed her eyes. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because you needed to find it yourself. If I had told you, you would have doubted. Now you have the evidence in your own hands. You know what you know, and you know what to do." "What do I do?" William was quiet for 3 seconds. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had spent 4 decades protecting assets from people who did not deserve them. "You do nothing. You change nothing. You let him believe everything is exactly as it was. And you let me build the architecture that will protect you when the time comes." "When will the time come?" "When he makes it come." Men like Dominic always accelerate. They always push further. They always believe they are smarter than the system. Let him believe that. Let him run. And when he runs far enough, the leash will catch. Vivian hung up. She went inside. She made dinner. She set the table. She greeted Dominic when he came home and asked about his day and listened to the answer and smiled at the right moments and said nothing about the receipt in her jacket pocket or the file on her encrypted drive or the conversation with her father that had just set in motion a legal and financial apparatus that Dominic Hale could not have imagined in his most paranoid. William Ashford spent the next 14 months building a fortress around his daughter's future. The trust was restructured. Assets that had been held in joint adjacent vehicles were quietly migrated into structures that required Vivian's sole signature. Property titles were reviewed. Investment accounts were audited. Every financial thread that connected Vivian's hidden wealth to her married life was identified, documented, and either severed or reinforced with legal protections so dense that a team of attorneys would need months to penetrate them. William also did something else. He instructed his legal team to monitor Dominic's financial behavior, not to interfere, simply to watch. And what they watched was a man who, emboldened by his wife's apparent obliviousness, began to make increasingly reckless decisions. Dominic moved money from their joint savings account into a personal brokerage account without telling Vivian. He listed himself as sole beneficiary on an insurance policy that had previously named both of them. He began making inquiries through a divorce attorney he believed Vivian did not know about regarding the division of marital assets in Massachusetts. He was planning. He was positioning. He believed he was 3 moves ahead. He was not aware that the board he was playing on belonged to someone else. William documented every move, every unauthorized transfer, every altered beneficiary form, every consultation with the divorce attorney. The file grew thick and precise, a record of a man systematically attempting to strip his wife of assets he did not know she possessed, using methods that were, in several instances, legally actionable. Then William Ashford was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Inoperable. The same disease that had taken Vivian's mother 23 years earlier. He had approximately 4 months. He used them. In those 4 months, William finalized the trust. He met with Vivian 3 times, each meeting lasting several hours, each one transferring knowledge and authority and strategic positioning that would activate upon his death. He introduced her to Catherine Wells, the attorney who would execute the estate plan and serve as Vivian's legal counsel going forward. He reviewed the file on Dominic one final time and added a handwritten note to the cover page. "He will come for the money at the funeral. Let him come. The door is already locked." William Ashford died on a Tuesday morning in October. Vivian was beside him. She held his hand. She watched the monitors flatten. She breathed. Then she stood. She straightened her clothes. She walked to the hallway, where Catherine Wells was waiting with a leather briefcase and a face that expressed nothing except professional readiness. "It is done," Vivian said. "I know. Everything is in place. He cannot touch it. He does not know that yet." "No, he does not." Vivian nodded. She looked back at the room where her father's body lay. She touched the platinum bracelet on her wrist. She felt the engraved initials under her fingertip. "Let him come to the funeral," she said. "Let him bring her. Let him think this is his moment. Catherine Wells had practiced estate law for 22 years. She had seen grief take many forms. She had never seen it take the form of absolute, architectural calm. And then, Catherine asked. Vivian turned back to face her. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had spent 7 years being underestimated and had used every one of those years to prepare for exactly this moment. And then we let him find out who his funeral was held on a Friday. October. Gray sky. The kind of cold that settles in a fabric and stays. 200 people attended. Business associates, old friends, foundation colleagues, the quiet, substantial people who had known William Ashford as a man of discretion and depth. Vivian stood beside the casket in a black dress, receiving condolences with the composed grace of a woman who had been trained since childhood to manage pain without displaying it. Her face was pale. Her eyes were dry. Her posture was the posture of someone bearing weight that no one else could see. Dominic arrived 40 minutes into the service. He was not alone. Serena Cross walked beside him. She was wearing a charcoal dress that did not quite conceal the curve of her 6-month pregnancy. Her hand was in Dominic's. Her chin was lifted. She walked into the funeral of Vivian's father as though she had been invited, as though her presence were natural, as though the woman standing beside the casket were already irrelevant. The room noticed. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The particular silence of collective shock moved through the mourners like a wave. Vivian saw them enter. She watched Dominic walk toward her with his mistress on his arm, past the casket of the man whose fortune he believed he was inside her. Not anger, not humiliation, recognition. The recognition of a woman watching a prediction fulfill itself with mechanical precision. Dominic stopped 3 feet from her. He did not release Serena's hand. He looked at Vivian with an expression that was calibrated to appear sympathetic, but contained, beneath the performance, something else entirely. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who believed he was watching his wife's power evaporate in real time. I'm sorry about your father, Viv. Vivian looked at him. She looked at Serena. She looked at their joined hands. She looked back at Dominic. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice was level, neutral, the voice of a woman checking a box on a list. She turned back to the next mourner. She did not look at Dominic again for the rest of the service. Dominic interpreted this as defeat. He interpreted the composure as numbness. He interpreted the lack of confrontation as confirmation that Vivian was exactly what he had always believed her to be. Quiet, passive, incapable of fighting back. He was performing the final miscalculation of his life. In the 3 weeks following the funeral, Dominic Hale accelerated. He moved out of the house. He moved into Serena's apartment. He did not discuss this with Vivian. He simply stopped coming home. And when Vivian texted to ask where he was, he responded with a single sentence. I think we both know this is over. He contacted his divorce attorney the following Monday. He instructed the attorney to begin proceedings. He wanted the house. He wanted half of whatever William had left behind. He wanted it fast, and he wanted it clean, and he believed, with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no by a woman he considered beneath him, that Vivian would comply. He also did something that William's legal team had predicted he would do. He accessed the joint investment account, the one Vivian had maintained with her foundation salary and the small personal dividends, and he transferred $62,000 into his personal brokerage. He did this without Vivian's knowledge or consent. He did this because he believed the account was marital property and therefore half his. He did this because he did not know that the account was monitored, that the transfer was logged in real time, and that unauthorized movement of jointly held assets during pending divorce proceedings constituted a violation that his own attorney would later describe, in a voice drained of all professional composure, as catastrophically stupid. Vivian watched all of it happen. She watched from the house that Dominic believed was jointly owned, but was in fact titled to a trust he could not access. She watched from the kitchen table where she drank coffee each morning and reviewed the updates Catherine Wells sent her in encrypted emails. She watched with the patience of a woman who had been taught by her father that the most dangerous opponent was the one who let you run until the leash caught. She did not call Dominic. She did not text. She did not plead or argue or cry. The silence was absolute, and it was strategic, and it was the loudest thing Dominic had ever failed to hear. 3 weeks after the funeral, Catherine Wells called. He moved the money. How much? $62,000. Personal brokerage. No authorization. Vivian closed her eyes. She touched the bracelet on her wrist. That is what my father said he would do. Your father was rarely wrong about people. Is it enough? It is more than enough. Combined with the altered beneficiary forms and the undisclosed consultations with his attorney, we have a pattern of deliberate financial misconduct during the marriage. In Massachusetts, that changes the calculus of equitable distribution significantly. Meaning, meaning when we walk into that room, he will not be negotiating from strength. He will be negotiating from a position so compromised that his own attorney will advise him to take whatever we offer and be grateful. Vivian opened her eyes. She looked out the window at the garden her father had helped her plant 3 years ago. The roses were dormant. The ground was cold, but the roots were deep, and they would hold through winter. Schedule the meeting, she said. The conference room. The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 weeks after the funeral. The offices of Wells and Hartley occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Boston. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The table was mahogany. The chairs were leather. The atmosphere was the particular kind of expensive silence that exists in rooms where large amounts of money change hands. Dominic arrived first. He wore his best suit, navy, Italian wool, the tie Vivian had bought him for their 5th anniversary, which he had chosen deliberately, though he could not have articulated why. He was accompanied by his attorney, a man named Philip Crane who specialized in high-asset divorce, and who had assured Dominic, repeatedly, that the proceedings would be straightforward. Philip Crane had not yet seen the file that Catherine Wells was carrying in her briefcase. He had not yet learned that his client's wife was not a non-profit worker earning $53,000 a year. He had not yet understood that the woman he had been preparing to negotiate against was the sole beneficiary of a trust worth $312 million, and that his client had spent the past 3 weeks committing documented financial misconduct against that trust's peripheral assets. Philip Crane was about to have a very bad morning. Vivian entered the room at 9:15. She wore a black blazer over a white blouse. No jewelry except the platinum bracelet. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was neutral. She looked like what she had always looked like to Dominic. Quiet, contained, manageable. Catherine Wells entered behind her. She was 54, silver-haired, and carried herself with the particular authority of a woman who had spent 2 decades winning cases that other attorneys considered unwinnable. She set her briefcase on the table. She did not smile. Dominic leaned back in his chair. He looked at Vivian with the expression of a man who believed this meeting was a formality, a signature, a settlement, a clean exit. Viv, you look well. Vivian did not respond. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. Philip Crane opened the proceedings with practiced efficiency. He outlined Dominic's position. The marriage had broken down irretrievably. His client sought an equitable division of marital assets, including the family home, joint investment accounts, and any inheritance received during the marriage from the estate of William Ashford. He said the last part with emphasis. Any inheritance received during the marriage. He said it as though it were the centerpiece of his argument, as though the inheritance were the prize and everything else was decoration. Catherine Wells listened without interruption. When Philip finished, she opened her briefcase and removed a single folder. She placed it on the table. Thank you, Mr. Crane. Before we discuss division, I need to clarify several factual matters regarding the asset landscape of this marriage. Philip nodded. Dominic shifted slightly in his chair. Catherine opened the folder. The family home at 412 Briarwood Lane. Mr. Hale believes this property is jointly owned. It is not. The property is titled to the Ashford Family Trust, established in 2014, 9 months before the marriage. Mr. Hale's name does not appear on the title, the mortgage, or any associated documentation. He has been, legally speaking, a guest in that property for the duration of the marriage. The room went quiet. Dominic's expression did not change immediately. It took 3 seconds for the words to reach the part of his brain that processed threat. The joint investment account at Fidelity. Mr. Hale transferred $62,000 from this account to his personal brokerage on October 29th without his spouse's knowledge or consent. This transfer occurred after Mr. Hale had already consulted with divorce counsel, establishing clear intent. Under Massachusetts law, this constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We have documented the transfer, the timing, and the intent. Philip Crane's pen stopped moving. He looked at his client. Dominic's jaw had tightened. The life insurance policy, originally naming both spouses as beneficiaries, was altered by Mr. Hale on September 14th to list himself as sole beneficiary. This alteration was not disclosed to Mrs. Hale. We have the original documentation and the amended filing. Catherine paused. She turned a page. Now, regarding the estate of William Ashford, she looked directly at Dominic. Her gaze was steady and without warmth. Mr. Hale appears to believe that his wife received a modest inheritance that is subject to equitable division. I need to correct this assumption. She placed a second document on the table. A single page. A summary of the Ashford Family Trust's primary holdings. William Ashford's estate, held in trust, is valued at approximately $312 million. This includes commercial real estate holdings across 6 states, a private equity portfolio, and controlling interests in 3 operating companies. The trust was established before the marriage. Its assets have never been commingled with marital funds. Under Massachusetts law, trust assets are not subject to equitable distribution in divorce proceedings. The silence in the room was absolute. Philip Crane stared at the document. His face performed a rapid sequence of recalculations, none of which produced a result he wanted. Dominic stared at Vivian. His mouth was slightly open. The confidence that had carried him into this room, the certainty that he was the one with leverage, the assumption that his quiet wife was a woman of modest means who would accept whatever terms he dictated, all of it was draining from his face like color from a photograph left in sunlight. 300, he started. He stopped. He swallowed. 300 million. Vivian looked at him. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence, which he had spent 7 years interpreting as passivity, was now revealing itself as what it had always been. The silence of someone who did not need to announce her power, because her power did not require an audience. Catherine continued. Furthermore, given the documented pattern of financial misconduct, including the unauthorized transfer, the altered beneficiary designations, and the undisclosed legal consultations, Mrs. Hale's legal team will be filing a counterclaim for the full recovery of dissipated assets, plus damages. Mr. Hale's exposure, conservatively estimated, exceeds $140,000. Philip Crane set down his pen. He turned to Dominic. His expression carried the particular exhaustion of an attorney who has just realized his client lied to him about everything that mattered. Dominic, we need to speak privately. Dominic did not move. He was still staring at Vivian. His eyes were searching her face for something, some crack, some sign of the woman he thought he knew, the quiet one, the manageable one, the one who never fought back. He found nothing. Her face was composed. Her hands were still folded on the table. The platinum bracelet caught the light from the window. You knew, he said. His voice was hoarse. This entire time, you knew everything. Vivian looked at him for 3 seconds. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice she had used for 7 years. Calm, measured, unhurried. I knew everything, Dominic. I knew about Serena. I knew about the money. I knew about the attorney. I knew about the insurance policy. I knew about every dinner and every hotel room and every lie you told me while I made your breakfast and paid your bills and managed your entire life. She paused. My father knew too. He knew before I did. And he spent the last year of his life making sure that when you finally showed me who you were, you would not be able to take a single thing that belonged to me. Dominic's hands were flat on the table. His fingers were white. You brought your pregnant mistress to his funeral, Dominic. You held her hand in front of his casket. You looked at me, and you thought you were watching me break. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked down at him. You were watching me finish. She turned and walked toward the door. Catherine Wells gathered the documents with efficient precision and followed. At the door, Vivian paused. She did not turn around. She spoke over her shoulder, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. The house will be relocked by Friday. Your personal belongings will be boxed and delivered to whatever address you provide to Catherine's office. The joint accounts will be frozen pending resolution of the dissipation claim. She opened the door. Goodbye, Dominic. The door closed behind her. The conference room remained silent. Philip Crane stared at the trust summary on the table. Dominic stared at the closed door. The harbor glittered through the windows. Indifferent. Dominic Hale's life came apart with the systematic inevitability of a structure losing its foundation. Week 1. The house. Vivian's attorneys sent formal notice that the property at 412 Briarwood Lane was trust-owned and that Dominic's occupancy rights had terminated upon the filing of divorce proceedings. His belongings arrived at Serena's apartment in 12 cardboard boxes, delivered by a moving company that charged a fee to his personal account. Week 2. The firm. Dominic's employer conducted a routine compliance review, triggered by the divorce filing, which required disclosure of any pending legal actions. The dissipation claim appeared in the disclosure. His managing director called him into a closed-door meeting that lasted 9 minutes. Dominic emerged without his access badge. He was placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. Week 3. The money. The joint accounts were frozen. The $62,000 he had transferred was flagged by the court as potentially dissipated assets. His personal brokerage was placed under a temporary restraining order. His credit cards, which he had been using to maintain the lifestyle Serena expected, began declining. Week 4. Serena. She had been attracted to Dominic, the complete package. The suits, the confidence, the dinners at restaurants where the host knew his name, the apartment he described as his, which was actually Vivian's, the career trajectory he narrated with such conviction that she never thought to verify it. Without the house, without the income, without the professional standing, without the invisible infrastructure that Vivian had maintained for 7 years, Dominic was a man on administrative leave living in his girlfriend's one-bedroom apartment with 12 boxes of belongings and a legal exposure that grew larger every week. Serena did the math. She was 29. She was pregnant. She had options. And the man sitting on her couch at 2 in the afternoon, watching financial news with the hollow expression of someone whose bluff had been called was not the option she had chosen. She told him on a Thursday evening. No drama. No argument. She simply said that she thought they needed different things, and that she wished him well, and that he should probably find somewhere else to stay by the weekend. Dominic sat in his car in her parking lot for 30 minutes. He had no house, no job, no wife, no mistress, no money he could access, no reputation he could trade on. Every surface his life had rested on for 7 years had been removed, and beneath those surfaces there was nothing. There had never been anything. For 10. The billboard. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Vivian Ashford stepped fully into the life she had spent 7 years concealing. She joined the board of the Ashford Foundation, her father's philanthropic vehicle, and expanded its mission from literacy to include workforce development, housing stability, and educational access for single mothers. She funded the expansion personally, committing $40 million over 5 years. She hired a team. She built programs. She operated with the same quiet, methodical precision she had applied to managing a household, except now the household was a foundation serving 12,000 people across 4 states. The Boston Globe profiled her in February. The headline read, "The Ashford Heir Nobody Knew." The article described her years of anonymity, her work at the Literacy Foundation, her decision to live without the family name. It did not mention Dominic by name. It did not need to. Everyone who knew them both understood the subtext. The Foundation's annual gala was held in April. 600 guests. The ballroom of the Four Seasons. Vivian stood at the podium in a navy gown, the platinum bracelet on her wrist, and delivered a speech about invisible labor and the women who perform it. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. The room was silent throughout. The speech was covered by 3 national outlets. A photograph from the event, Vivian at the podium, composed and luminous, appeared on a digital billboard in the financial district 2 weeks later as part of the Foundation's awareness campaign. Dominic saw it on a Wednesday afternoon. He was walking to a job interview at a firm significantly smaller than the one that had placed him on leave. He was wearing a suit that needed pressing. He was carrying a briefcase that contained a resume he had rewritten 4 times. He looked up at the intersection and saw his ex-wife's face, 30 feet tall, looking out over the city with an expression he had never seen during their marriage. Certainty. Authority. The expression of a woman who no longer needed to hide. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the billboard for a long time. Pedestrians moved around him. Traffic passed. The city continued its indifferent machinery. He thought about the woman he had married. The quiet one. The one who packed his lunches and paid his bills and never raised her voice. The one he had dismissed as passive. The one he had cheated on because he believed she was too small to leave. The one whose father he had disrespected at a funeral because he believed the old man's money would soon be his. He thought about all of it, and he understood, standing on that sidewalk in a wrinkled suit with a briefcase full of desperation, that he had spent 7 years living inside a structure built by someone he never bothered to see. He had mistaken her silence for emptiness. He had mistaken her patience for weakness. He had mistaken her invisibility for insignificance. He had been wrong about everything, and the wrongness was not a single mistake. It was the entire architecture of his life, built on a foundation of contempt for the woman who was actually holding it up. The light changed. He crossed the street. The billboard disappeared behind him. He walked toward his interview at a firm that would offer him a salary less than half what he had earned before, and he accepted it because he had no choice, because every choice had been made for him by a woman he never knew was making them. And the morning after, on a Sunday in June, 9 months after the divorce, Vivian sat on the porch of a house in Vermont that her father had bought 30 years ago and never sold. It was small, wooden, surrounded by birch trees and silence. The kind of place where wealth was invisible because it chose to be, not because it had to be. She held a cup of coffee. The morning was cool. Birds moved through the trees with purposeful energy. The bracelet on her wrist caught the early light. Her phone sat on the table beside her. On it was the encrypted folder she had maintained for 2 years. Every credit card statement, every hotel receipt, every screenshot, every timestamp. The complete documentary record of Dominic Hale's betrayal, assembled with the precision of a woman whose father had taught her that evidence was not paranoia, but inheritance. She opened the folder. She scrolled through it once. Slowly, the way you walk through a house you have already left, checking each room one final time, not because you have forgotten something, but because you want to confirm that nothing remains worth carrying. Then she selected the folder. She pressed delete. The phone asked her to confirm. She confirmed. The screen cleared. The folder was gone. 2 years of documentation, erased in a single gesture. Not because she forgave Dominic. Forgiveness was not the relevant concept. She deleted it because the file had served its purpose. It had protected her. It had armed her. It had given her the evidence she needed to walk into that conference room and in a marriage on her own terms. And now it was finished, and carrying it further would mean carrying him further, and she was done carrying anyone who did not deserve the weight. She set the phone down. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the birch trees moving in the wind, and she thought about her father. She thought about his instruction. You will know the right person because they will never make you feel like you owe them an explanation for being quiet. She had not found that person yet. Maybe she would. Maybe she would not. But she had found something her father had not explicitly promised her. Something he had perhaps hoped she would discover on her own. She had found the understanding that silence was not absence. That quietness was not emptiness. That the woman who managed everything without acknowledgement was not weak for doing so. She was simply operating at a frequency that most people could not detect. Dominic had not detected it. His mother had not detected it. His colleagues, his friends, his mistress, none of them had seen what Vivian was doing because none of them had thought to look. They had seen a quiet woman and assumed quiet meant small. They had seen patience and assumed it meant surrender. They had seen invisibility and assumed it meant insignificance. They had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost them everything. Vivian finished her coffee. She stood. She walked inside the house and set the mug in the sink and looked out the kitchen window at the Vermont morning, green and gold and silent, and she felt the specific, irreplaceable sensation of a woman who has stopped performing smallness for the comfort of people who did not deserve her full height. She was not angry. Anger had done its work and been retired. She was not sad. Sadness visited in waves, and she let it pass without holding it. She was not vengeful. The vengeance had been architectural, not emotional. The simple act of withdrawing from a system that could not function without her and letting physics do the rest. What she was, standing in that kitchen in the morning light with the bracelet on her wrist and her father's memory in her chest, was complete. Not because a man had validated her, not because money had rescued her, but because she had spent 7 years building something in silence. And when the silence broke, what emerged was not wreckage. It was her. The quiet ones are not empty. They are full. They are so full that they do not need to make noise to prove it. And when the world finally sees them clearly, it is not because they have changed. It is because everyone else has finally learned to look. If this story patience, new stories arrive weekly for those who build quietly and leave on their own terms. The next one is already written.